Young to old, from that very first handhold, clutched like paper straws, grasping for more. To games or winning fame or toys or childhood ploys, to chase after the sunset, to pursue tomorrow's joys, to parties, grades, success and stability, for a career, for love, for an inner sense of serenity, reaching for the world to experience equality, security, whilst holding the hands of our very own insecurity and endless pursuit. Confusion of life's fusion of endless commotion and motion, emotion and motion and more. Pursuit of meaning when the world feels so dim, pursuit of community when friendship wanes thin, pursuit of perfect when the expectations never cease, pursuit of justice for there to finally be peace, pursuit of hope. Pursuit 2022, 7th to 11th of February. What are we searching for?
Welcome to our first evening of Pursuit. We are so glad to have you here, whether you've been to one of our Christian Union events before or this is your first time. We're so glad to have you. And if you're joining us on the live stream as well, we're so glad to see you. My name is In Young. I am a second-year engineer at Clare. Yes, Clare.
And my name is Molly. I'm a second-year medic at Selwyn. Thanks, guys. So this week, the Cambridge Christian Union is having a series of events looking at the idea of pursuit. We'll be having various talks, interviews, and performances exploring the stuff of life and what we spend our time searching for.
So just some practicalities before we get started. If you're looking for some toilets, there's one through that door there, and there's two through that back door there. There's one upstairs, one downstairs. The one downstairs is an accessible toilet.
And if you have any other questions, feel free to go ahead and ask one of the guys in the blue pursuit jumpers. They'd be more than happy to help you. So each of the days this week, we're going to be looking at a theme. And today's theme is meaning. Earlier today, we had a lunchtime event where we looked at the pursuit of happiness and whether we can find meaning in that. If you came along to that, we really hope you enjoyed it. Tonight, we'll continue along this theme of meaning with loads of performances, a short talk, and a Q&A. Exploring the meaning of life and whether there's meaning in the mess.
Before we get started, we're going to start off with a little game. We could have a presentation up. It's very simple. You look at the picture and you guess the college. So if we could have the first slide. Which college is this? Is it A, Trinity Hall, B, Peterhouse, or C, Sydney? Talk yourselves, 10 seconds, and we'll reveal it. Okay, the answer is Peterhouse. Anyone from Peterhouse? Nope. Next one.
Next one. Which college's hall is this? A, Corpus Christi, B, Christ, or C, Pembroke? And the answer is Corpus Christi.
Woo. Next question. Which college is this? It's a lot of concrete. Is it A, Selwyn, B, Cats, or C, Homerton? Okay, we will reveal. The answer is Homerton. Next question.
Slightly controversial on this one. Is it A, Homerton, B, Girton, or C, Trinity College, Dublin? Sorry, guys, I know you get this a lot, but it's got to be done.
All of them.
All of them. Good answer.
If you're from Girton, you might want to start walking now, so you get back in time. We'll give her by majority. I think it was Girton. Which college is this? It's very much like a prison. Is it A, Churchill, B, Robinson, or C, Fitz? Oh. The answer is Churchill. Woo. Next question.
A bit of a harder one, this one. Is it A, Keys, B, Clare, or C, Keble College, Oxford?
Oh,
Oh, silence.
I don't know this one. Oh.
Answer?
Oh, the
Trick question.
next question. Which college is this? Is it A, Cats, B, Robinson, or C, Selwyn? It's quite hard. We'll give you the answer. It's Cats. Whew. Oh.
Last one, another not quite so nice looking one. Sorry, guys. Is it A, Churchill, B, Murray Edwards, or C, Robinson?
Some more time for this one.
The answer? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. It's a present in central London. Okay, we're now going to be having some performances. So we're asking a huge question tonight, whether there is meaning in the mess. And we will start off by thinking about this through some music and spoken word. So first up, we have Abby and John. Please could we have a massive round of applause?
Yeah, we're going to be singing a psalm taken from the Bible, and this song's kind of a prayer to God in the midst of like deep suffering. So we're going to be singing. How long, oh Lord, will you forget me? How long, oh Lord, will you hide your face away? How long, oh Lord, will anxious thoughts arise in me, and all the day have sorrow in my heart? Consider me, give me an answer. Light up my eyes, or my soul will sleep in death. My enemies threaten me on every side, and they rejoice every time I fall. But I will trust your steadfast love, your grace and mercy shown to me. My soul will sing to you, my Lord, for I know you have been good to me. But I will trust your steadfast love, your grace and mercy shown to me. My soul will
anxious thoughts arise in me, and all the day have sorrow in my heart.
Thanks. I'm Mike, and I'm going to do a piece of spoken word that I thought would fit well at the start of this week, as it's all about kind of what are we searching for. And this poem is called Hungry, and it's about what we're hungry for, what we're searching for, and what that might tell us about what's real. A woman with wisdom graven in the wrinkles of her calloused hands once looked me in the eye and said, "You hungry?" And she offered me a chip. Do you think humans would get hungry if there was no such thing as food? My phone buzzed in my pocket, but she grabbed my arm and said, "Don't look at it. Just let it sit there, bathing in its own electric light." I asked her why. I said, "I want to look." She grinned at me and said, "I thought you might. Just wait, though, for a minute. Feel what's happening in your gut. Feel how much you want to look, because it's probably nothing special, right? What is it that you're hungry for? What is it that you need? What would calm that itch, do you think? Or should you just scratch it till it bleeds? Are you aching for connection? Are you itching to be known? Are you longing to belong again? Or is it actually just your phone? She chuckled and she sat me down and looked up into the whirling sky. The rivers flow and flow into the sea, she said, but is it ever full? The wind blows fierce from west to east, then east to west, but did it ever find where it was going to and rest? All things are full of weariness, so deep we cannot utter it. All breathing things are aching, child, all longing things frustrated. Do you think you'll ever have enough? Do you think you could take hold of it? Can you close your fingers round the sun or catch a handful of the morning mist? Tell me what got so shattered in our hearts that joy leaks softly through the cracks? What got so broken in this world of ours that peace can't bear to face the facts? Tell me why I'm always hungry. Tell me why I'm always scared. Tell me why I can't get hold of things. Tell me why my heart still cares. Tell me why I'm always thirsty. Tell me why I'm not enough. Give me something. Give me something more than empty words and hollow stuff. She shook her head and smiled at herself and had another chip. Seriously, do you think we would get hungry if there was no such thing as food? They'll tell you on those screens of yours that there's nothing more than surface, that you've got to tap and watch and spend, because in the end, you've got no purpose. They'll show you epic stories that grasp your heart and make you feel about love and sacrifice and meaning, and then say, of course, those things aren't real. We'll do transcendence for you, safe behind this glass, so you can stuff yourself with shallowness and not get sick of it too fast. You know deep in your gut, don't you, that that's barely half the truth? That it won't feel so freeing anymore beyond the breathless rush of youth, that one day you'll get bored of treading water and scribbling in the sand. That you'll get tired of everything you gather slipping through your hands. I think you know you're hungry for something that would last, that could make your future unafraid and drink the bitterness from your past, something you could actually hold and that would hold you too. She smiled again, much wider than before. And do you think we would get hungry if there was no such thing as food?
Hello. Hello. Okay, we're getting better. I'm Lawrence. I'm from Trinity Hall, Thank you. I love film soundtracks. So I'm going to be playing two soundtracks for you on the piano today. In one film, the main character is searching for the meaning of these stars which appear on her birthday each year. So, along with a thief and some vagabonds and a horse and a chameleon, they go and find out that the meaning of these stars are actually to call her home, which I think is rather apt for this evening. The other soundtrack, um, these people are, these two characters the film is about, they're pursuing this friendship, there's something more, and they find that it's when they actually throw their fears into the wind and when they actually trust each other and let go, then they become this awesome symbiosis of Viking and dragon. So I give you music from Tangled and How to Train Your Dragon. I hope you enjoy.
Hiya, I'm Lucy,
I'm Ruth.
and we're going to sing a song by Rhys Lewis called Better Than Today, which is all about that overwhelming feeling when you turn on the news each day and it's always bad news, and just wanting to escape that and bury your head in the sand, but clinging on to the hope that there is something better. And I think that universal sense that we're all searching for something that's better than today. So here we go. I don't read the headlines and I don't watch the news, 'cause silence faith in something every time I do. Well, I don't mean to bury my head in the sand, but I'm just trying to live this life as best as I can. Times get tough, but I don't give up, 'cause I know I'm not alone. 'Cause we're all searching for something, we're all craving change, hoping tomorrow is better than today. We're all searching for some way, trying to find a way, hoping tomorrow is better than today. Hoping tomorrow is better than today.
It's not easy sleeping when I lay down in bed, 'cause I got all these worries running through my head. And it's hard to keep pushing forward when trouble pulls you back and you wake up even further from the dream you had. Times get tough, but I don't give up, 'cause I know I'm not alone. 'Cause we're all reaching for something, we're all craving change, hoping tomorrow is better than today. We're all searching for some way, trying to find a way, hoping tomorrow is better than today. Hoping tomorrow is better.
So just hold on when someone breaks you. Just hold on when feelings shake you. Just hold on when darkness change you. Just hold on. 'Cause we're all reaching for something, we're all craving change, hoping tomorrow is better than today. So let's keep searching for some way, we can find a way to make tomorrow better than today. Let's make tomorrow better than today. Let's make tomorrow better than today. Let's make tomorrow better than today.
Hello. My name's Dorothy, and I'm going to be
doing another poem that I wrote, which is called Can I Come In? And it's all about the idea of there being meaning in the mess. It was kind of written thinking about how often we can put up big pretenses of what our life is and think that the showing of perfect is where meaning is found. But that often our life happens where it's messy, and our life is messy. And so this poem is kind of exploring that. Put a bit lower, a bit smaller than that. Imagine you're in a home, your home, and it's lovely. White, bright, tall, secure. You weave around, straightening the pale white cushions and opening the matching white blinds to let in the morning sun rays stray a pathway through the long cream bay windows. Painstakingly inspecting your neat, no specks of dust, spick and span, glistening habitat with the glorious prospect that it may stay like this for longer than a day. It is sparkling clean and lean with the scent of smoothie supplementary substitutes and simply and thankfully fresh, without the odor of clutter and junk and memories. Light grey paint fills to the brim the empty walls, save a few pieces of art, artfully adorned with dark dashes of mahogany wood, burdened with meticulously stacked books less thumbed than a horse hoof. A light green leafy plant sits in the corner furthest from the door, straining against itself to catch some of the morning gleam. It's home. It's everything you are. Home contains and controls so many aspects of your life, and yet home contains and controls what is your life, and you're proud of it. A knock. You open, and there he is. Hi, he says. May I come in? It's a simple question, but chances of acceptance are dim. Do you want to welcome him? With a glimpse of a smile, you allow, of course, and in he walks. Ignoring your manufactured artistic experience, blatantly neglecting your tasteful conformance to convenience, he asks, with a sense of knowing kindness that you just can't place, may I go upstairs, please? The familiarity you feel makes you bob your head yes, and he turns and climbs the cream-carpeted staircase. 1, 2, 3, 4. With every step, he gets closer to where you don't want him to go, where you don't want him to know it exists. And 5, 6, 7. There's only 12 stairs before it's out there, and suddenly you realize how much you care. And 8, 9. Heart stop breathing, rocket up. 10. Palms sweat with frets that might get to 11. And with the 12th bound of the stairs, and the door is open in one great sweep. And imagine you're in an attic. Your attic. And it's not lovely. Dark, dim, slanted ceiling. Even the door is off its hinges, but it's open and you're there, breathing mists, the damp, cold air. It's the attic. The attic you don't want to be found, walking with your head tilted left so it doesn't hit the top. Wooden beams lead the way to within those few meters. Dust, must, clustered in your throat like dark ground coffee. Cardboard boxes everywhere, duct tape trailing. It's not contained or controlled. It's not containing or controlling. You're not proud of those fallen piles of files of unfinished work. Scrawled novels of adventure without their final chapter, secret diaries so faded of stories of being jaded, pictures that no one ever knew were being snapped, kept up and preserved like tiny artifacts in this old attic, original songs that you can never quite remember, 3 copper trophies from back when you were a dedicated choir member. All unsure, all uncertain, all unanswered, stories and scenes flash by in your mind, clutter and junk and memories. Like a proposition with no acceptance, like a query with no response. They all got rushed by and swept up now. And what does it mean now? And he's found your attic. But maybe he's found you too. You're scared and afraid and maybe a little bit relieved. He smiles again. That deep, warm, true, open smile. You swear you've never seen one like that, at least in a while. This is your life. He says, I see it. The mess and the mix-up, the misery, mash-up, mayhem, this bunch of confusion, this life-bundled fusion, I see it. This mess is your life. And mess has an answer. How do you know the skipping rope is tangled? Because it is meant to be free. How do we know this mess is dirty? Because we have a longing for it to be clean. These are all questions posed, and I have their conclusions. They're all yearnings to be fulfilled, and I have their final truth. This mess is your life. This attic is where it happened. There's no need to hide behind a tall white house fashioned. Besides, this life and this mess, it has a meaning, and I have the answer. And so I'll ask again. May I come in?
Thank you so much, guys. All those performances were amazing. Can we give them another big round of applause? So now Michael, our speaker for this evening, is going to be picking up on some of these themes for the next 20 minutes or so, before we have a short Q&A. So Michael, if you could just join us on the stage. Hi, Michael. Hello. Thanks for joining us this evening. So most of us don't know who you are. So who are you and what are you doing here?
Well, that's a good question. I hope you know the answer, but maybe you don't. So my name is Michael Otts. I come from not too far away, just outside a city called Leicester. I am married to Rebecca. She has a very interesting job. She's an airline pilot. And I like to think I have an interesting job. I get to speak at events organised by Christian unions, not just here in the UK, but in other parts of Europe and beyond, at the invitation of Christian unions like the one here.
So Michael, we've heard that you like winging things. So to put you on the spot...
I should say my wife likes winging, but that would be a bad pun.
Yeah. Because tonight you'll be talking about meaning, we thought we could test you on some meaning of Cambridge slang.
Okay.
So, Cambridge students often talk about going to the plodge. Do you know what that means? Plodge.
To the plodge?
Plodge, yes.
I feel like that would be somewhere where you might be going to the toilet.
Not quite.
No? You don't do a number 2 in the plodge?
You could.
No.
No. The answer is Porter's Lodge.
Oh, okay. Right. Maybe not then.
Okay, next one. Something a lot of us couldn't live without is a place called Mainsbury's. Any idea what that is?
Maysbury's? Mainsbury's. It sounds like Sainsbury's on the main street.
Oh, pretty close.
So it's the Sainsbury's on the main street?
Yeah, the one just in the middle of the town that we...
Yeah, I've been there twice today, actually, so I can,
nice.
Very
well
useful.
Practiced,
yeah.
And lastly, maybe even more important than Mainsbury's, is a jip.
A jip?
A jip. What could a jip be?
Can you tell me, like, a clue? Is it a noun, an adjective, a verb?
Away.
Like
it's too easy.
It's a place? Is that too...
It is a place.
Place.
much of a hint? Yeah, it's a place.
The jip.
Go there quite a lot.
Yes.
Not what you're thinking for
But
the
it's not
first
the
one.
toilet.
No.
The jip. Sounds a bit like the gym, but maybe like no. Your room.
Near your room.
Close.
Near your room.
Yeah.
Kitchen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got
The
it.
jip.
I mean, kitchen's a bit far-fetched, but yeah.
Okay.
It's got a microwave in it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that. End of putting you on the spot. Yeah, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Well, you can establish from that I am not a Cambridge graduate. So if you want to hear a Cambridge graduate speak, you have to come at lunchtime. But it is nonetheless really great to be with you this week for this week of pursuits. And just a little heads up, as our host mentions, in about 20 minutes or so, we'll have a break and then we'll have time for questions. So if you can think of any questions through the talk off the back of anything you've heard this evening, then go to Pigeonhole, stick in the passcode MESS, and you'll get to our room. And you can put in your questions. And if you can't think of a good question, the good news is that you can see other people's questions. And if you think they're good questions, you can vote them up. If you think they're bad questions, I don't think you can vote them down, but you can try and think of a better question if you can. And we'll deal with maybe not all of them, but some of the most popularly voted ones later. That has an added advantage, by the way, and that is if you find the next 20 minutes really boring, you can get your phone out, you can be texting your mates, and I'll assume you're just asking questions. And as long as someone asks questions, you won't be busted, okay? But we're looking at this topic tonight. Is there meaning in the mess? Is there meaning in the mess? And there's a lot of mess in our world, isn't there, when you stop to think about it? Think about the aftermath of the pandemic that we're still living with. Think of the threat of war in our own continent again, as unthinkable as that might seem. Think about the ongoing and increasing environmental crisis. Think about the inflation and economic uncertainty that we might be facing over the next decades. There's so much mess out there, isn't there, that we have to contend with. But the reality is, there's not just mess out there. There's also, so often in our experience of life, mess in here. Mess that doesn't make the news headlines, but is very much on our minds. And sometimes it comes out the blue, doesn't it? I remember getting a phone call a couple of years ago from a good friend of mine, Saturday afternoon, just finished watching the rugby, lovely day, and I could tell instantly from her voice that something was wrong. Her daughter, year before, had been diagnosed with cancer. A couple of weeks before that, had been given the all clear, and there was a wonderful celebration when it seemed that everything was going to be okay. Apart from it wasn't. They just heard that the cancer had returned, and it was inoperable, and that she was going to die. And when those kind of things hit us in life, we ask the question quite naturally, don't we? Why? Why them? Why me? Why now? Why? Maybe you've had cause to ask that question in the last year or so. Why? It's so natural, isn't it? But is there an answer to that question? Is there meaning in the mess? And actually, some people would say, well, there isn't any meaning. There is no answer to that question of why. And actually, many atheists would consistently say with their worldview that this is just the way things are. There's no answer. There's no meaning. David Benatar, the South African philosopher, put it this way. He said, life is meaningless. And he spoke of the cosmic insignificance and the pointlessness of the entire human endeavor. Lawrence Krauss, the American physicist, said this: we are a 1% bit of pollution within the universe. We are completely insignificant. Or Alex Rosenberg, in his book, The Atheist Guide to Reality, asks these questions. What's the meaning of the universe and of life? There's none. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Now, actually, I want to say I respect the consistency that each of those people show with their worldview. It might be tough to say those things, and yet they're, I think, being consistent. That's just the way things are. There is no meaning. And you know what? Some of the times, I can see what they're getting at, because we can look at life and it can feel that way, can't it? It can feel futile and meaningless. But on the other side, there's not much hope, is there, if that is the case? And I'm not sure we actually live as if that is the case in the day-to-day things of life. So in reaction to that worldview, many religious systems want to answer the question, is there an answer to the question why? Is there meaning in the mess? And they say, yes, there is. Buddhism, as a way of thinking, actually is a response to the reaction to the suffering we see in our world. It says that suffering is caused by desire. If we can eliminate desire, we can eliminate suffering. It teaches the idea of karma, the idea that we get, in a sense, what we deserve. It's a way of understanding the suffering we see around us. Or in the Islamic worldview, people talk about inshallah, the will of Allah. Everything has a purpose. Allah has a will for everything that happens. Is there meaning in the mess? Yes, we may not know what it is, but there is meaning. And again, I can respect the desire to try and find meaning in the mess of our world. But at the same time, I'm not sure whether some of those ideas ultimately help when we go through suffering ourselves. When we're the ones experiencing anguish and pain and suffering, are we content to say that that's just because we're not enlightened enough? That we just need to eliminate desire, that these feelings are somehow not what we should be feeling? We might like the idea of karma and reincarnation as a way of making sense of the suffering of our world, but what about when it's us that are suffering or our friends? How does that feed into the feelings of compassion that we have? And we might say that everything is the will of Allah, but if that is the case, does it mean that sometimes we don't intervene to alleviate suffering or to make the world a better place when we could? I remember a few years ago, I was in the Middle East, I was having a wonderful trip, and I was getting a taxi somewhere, and I got in the back of the taxi, and I put on my seatbelt, and the taxi driver looked at me as if I had just done like the most unforgivable sin. And he looks at me and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just putting my seatbelt on." He says, "Don't you trust my driving?" And I'm not sure what to say here. So I said, "Well, I'm not sure I trust other people's driving." Thought that was maybe the safer thing to do. Although sooner or later I realized I'm not sure I trusted his driving either. But then he says, "Well, you don't need to." I said, "Why not?" He says, "Well, inshallah, it's the will of Allah. If we're going to crash, we're going to crash." I thought, well, maybe a seatbelt would be helpful despite that. But how do we make sense of the mess? The atheist worldview says, life is futile, there is no meaning. Religions say, there is meaning, but does it help us emotionally? What does the Christian faith have to say in answer to that question? Is there meaning in the mess? And in one sense, I want to say that Christianity identifies with both of those worldviews, both the atheistic one, in that sense of the futility of life, but also so many of the religious beliefs and convictions that we have that searches for some sense of meaning and purpose. To look at that, I just want to look at a few verses from a letter that was written by an early Christian and is contained in what we call the New Testament in the Bible. And they're printed out for you on your table, so you can just pick them up if you can. Because we're just going to refer, won't read the whole thing, but just a few sentences from this segment of a letter written by this early Christian to a group of Christians in the city of Rome. And Paul, the author of these words, begins by saying this: "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." At which point you might think, why should I listen to anything this guy is about to say? I consider our present sufferings are not worth comparing. I mean, this guy seems to be a bit glib, doesn't he? I mean, does he know what suffering is like? Has he experienced the mess of our world? Can he really understand? Actually, the answer is yes, he does. Because the author of these words is a man who had suffered a great deal. We can read in other parts of the New Testament about some of the things that happened to him, some of the suffering that was inflicted upon him by others, and the suffering that he himself experienced as he struggled with a chronic physical condition throughout his life. He knew and experienced suffering. He wasn't speaking from some kind of ivory tower. He knew what suffering was like. But then he says this in verse 20, "For the creation was subjected to frustration." Some translations of the Bible use the word futility at that point. And that sounds a little bit like the atheist worldview, doesn't it? Everything's futile. It certainly chimes in sometimes with how we feel when we look at the mess around us. But there is a difference, and it's this. He says the creation was subjected to frustration. He says when we look at the world, it looks like a place of futility, and yet the clue in that little sentence is that it hasn't always been this way. Something has gone wrong with our world. The world we live in is not the way it once was. And the Bible story explains what happened. If you go back to the very first book of the Bible, we have this picture of a world that God creates, a world that's good, a world without suffering, pain, sickness, and death. And into that good world, God creates people to enjoy Him, to enjoy each other, to enjoy the world that He's created. And then He gives these people a choice. He says, you can live in this world my way, the way that it was intended for, or you can live in it your own way. At some point, people might ask the question, well, why did God give these people that kind of choice? Wasn't that a little bit risky of God to do that, given what they could do with that choice? Actually, it's worth remembering, isn't it, that choice and love go together. If you want one, you have to have the other. And in creating a world where love is possible, God gives these people a choice. It's a bit like when I proposed to my now wife. What happened? Did I get down on one knee and say, "You will marry me"? And when you do, I want you to know that on Mondays you'll cook me curry, and on Tuesdays it will be steak, and on Wednesdays you'll do the washing, on Thursdays the ironing, and if you do it well, the weekend you can have some time off. That is not what I did, by the way. You could tell by the fact that she actually did marry me. Because that's not love, is it? Love involves choice. It involves freedom. And God creates a world because he is a God of love where love is possible. And yet the storyline of the Bible tells us the tragic response to that freedom that God gives us is that people have used it not always to love, but to hate. Not always to live in the world God's way, but to live in it our own way. And actually the Bible says we've so often made a mess. It's interesting, people often like to blame God for the suffering and the mess of our world, when actually, sometimes the answer is that we've caused some of the mess. Who is it that starts wars? Who is it that causes conflict? Who is it that brings about injustice and pain in our world? So often it's people, and if we're really honest, we have to admit sometimes it's ours, isn't it? Because what is it that brings pain into our lives? Not just the actions of world leaders and dictators. Sometimes the pain in our lives is caused by the people closest to us, the people that are meant to love us. And maybe we've caused it to people that we're meant to love too. So this world, the Bible says, is not the kind of world that it once was. It's subjected to frustration. It's subjected to futility. Now, I know at this point maybe we have lots of questions. Maybe you have the question, well, why should I even accept the Bible storyline of reality? Like, can I even believe that kind of stuff? And I know you may have questions about that and you can throw them out later. But can I say, one of the things I find particularly attractive and engaging with the Bible's story of reality is it does seem to make sense of my experience. A few years ago, I remember standing by the grave of my friend's son who took his own life tragically. And as we gathered round that grave, I remember something in me just said, this is not the way things are meant to be. And actually the Bible says, that's right. This is not the way things are meant to be. When we feel that sense that something is wrong with our world, that this mess shouldn't be our experience, the Bible says that's absolutely right. We live in a world that has been subjected to futility, to frustration. This is not the way things are meant to be. But that's not the end of the story. Look down at verse 22, the second paragraph. Because Paul, writing these words, continues, and he says this, we know the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to this present time. Now, I thankfully don't know and won't know much about childbirth in my life from a personal point of view. But apparently it can be very painful. But have you ever considered there is a real difference in a hospital between the pain that's experienced in the maternity wards and in the oncology ward? Real difference, isn't there? Not because necessarily one is of greater magnitude, but in one there is a sense of hope, isn't there? Yes, pain, but pain tinged with hope about what that pain will achieve. The pain of childbirth, with the longing of new life to come. And that's a beautiful picture that Paul picks up on in these words. He talks about this world, this messy, broken world, groaning, but in the pains of childbirth. This pain and suffering that is tinged with hope. Because what the Bible story tells us is the world we live in is not the way it once was. Something's gone wrong. But it also says the world we live in is not the way it one day will be. There is a picture of hope. And that hope is all-encompassing. Just look back at verse 21. It talks about the whole creation being liberated from its bondage to decay. Or look down at verse 23. It says, not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit grown inwardly as we eagerly wait for the adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. Paul says this hope is not some pie-in-the-sky spiritual hope where we go and sit on a cloud and play harps and go to choir practice, that kind of ephemeral view of a kind of otherworldly hope. Paul says this hope that the Bible talks about is a hope for this world, this creation, this cosmos. It's a hope for these physical bodies, not just a disembodied soul. It's an amazing hope that one day God is going to restore the broken mess of our world and put it right. And that's wonderful. And it means that even in the midst of the darkness, we can look forward with hope. I don't know about you, I love February. Does anyone else love the month of February, or am I just the only one who loves February? You know the thing about February? February is as dark as November, and sometimes it's even colder, isn't it? But I love February, and I hate November, because in November, it's dark and it's getting worse. But in February, it's dark, but it's getting better. And you start to see the daffodils coming through, and the snowdrops are in bloom, and occasionally you feel a little bit of warmth from the sun, and you think spring is coming. It's dark, but it's darkness that's tinged with hope. And that's what the Bible says. Our world is a dark, messy place, but it's a mess that's tinged with hope, because one day, spring is coming. Or think of Lord of the Rings. We didn't have any music from it earlier, but I love the soundtrack and I love the films. But you remember that moment in the second film, The Two Towers? And it's my favourite moment in the film is where Sam and Frodo are talking. And Frodo wants to give up, doesn't he? Because he feels that there's no hope. And then Sam, my favourite character, he turns to Frodo and he encourages him and he says this: "It's like in the old stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end. How could the world go back to the way it was after so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness will pass and a new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out all the brighter. Those are the stories that stayed with you, Mr. Frodo, even though you're too young to understand why." It's beautiful, isn't it? You can tell I like it because I memorized it. But it's beautiful because it says not only will a new day come and the sun will shine again, and if you live in England, that is a great hope, isn't it? But it will shine out all the brighter. And I think something Tolkien's Christian faith comes through in that. That's what he talks about, Paul, in verse 18. Our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed. Yes, this world is messy, but one day the mess is going to get sorted out. What an amazing hope. I mentioned my friend's daughter, who was given the news that she was going to die. And when Kerry received that news, she wrote on her Instagram account an explanation about what was happening to her, in the knowledge that she was within months, most likely, going to die. And she wrote this: "My wise daddy said this to me in the moments after we got this news. It was never meant to be about this life anyway. This is just a blip on the road to eternity, and we're just passing through. I'm confident heaven will be infinitely better, and I'm excited to see Jesus face to face." See, Kerry could write that because she knew something of the reality of this hope. The world we live in is not the way it once was, but it's not the way it one day will be. We can look forward to that. Before I finish, maybe just one question we might be asking about all this is say, okay, but is that just pie in the sky? Yeah, great to know that maybe there is hope that one day this messy world will be put right, but how does that help me now in the middle of the mess of 2022 and whatever mess you're going through? How does that help me? Let me just mention two things before I finish. Firstly, it helps us in the way that we respond to the mess. Just look back down at that passage again and look at the last paragraph, verse 28. Some famous words that are well known to folks who might have read the Bible a bit, because it says this: "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose." Now, sometimes Christians can be rather insensitive when people are going through suffering, and they quote this verse at people rather glibly. "Oh, don't worry, all things work together for good." And sometimes in life, of course, we can look back on periods of suffering and difficulty and we think, well, it worked for good. I'm glad that that didn't happen, or I'm glad that that happened, even though at the time it was hard. But is that all this is saying? Because while it's okay to do that in some situations, it's much harder in others, isn't it? Think of my friend sitting with him the day after his son took his life. Do I just go in and say, don't worry, it'll all work out for good? Pretty insensitive, wouldn't it? Is everything good? Clearly not. One other rendering of this verse from the original language in which the Bible is written, it's one of the footnotes in this same translation, puts this verse another way. And I find this really helpful way of looking at it. It could also be translated this way: in all things, God works together with those who love him to bring about what is good. See, what Paul is saying here is not that the things that happen to us are good if only we could see them from a different perspective, because there are lots of things in our world that are not good. And in fact, one of the profound things about being a Christian is being able to say, actually, this world is not as it's meant to be. There's lots of stuff in our world that's wrong. But somehow God is able to work with us. Not so that we get to a point of saying, hey, the stuff in my life's all good, really. But so that we can respond to the stuff in our life in a way that is good. I wonder if you've heard of this lady, Rachel Del Hollander. A few years ago, she was the last of a number of victims to give their victim impact statement against a guy called Larry Nassar, the American coach of the gymnastics team, who sexually abused her and many, many other girls. What she has experienced at the hands of Larry Nassar was horrific. And she didn't hold back in speaking of that in her statements. But as a Christian, Rachel Den Hollander has responded to what has happened to her in an incredible way. She hasn't come to a point of saying, hey, it was all good, because it wasn't. It was evil. But actually now as a lawyer, she works to bring about justice for other people who are victims of abuse. She helps organizations change their structures to help prevent such things from happening. She hasn't said, now I'm a Christian, I can look and say that everything in my life was good. It wasn't. But the way she's responded, with the help of God, is good. Or I think of my friends who lost their son. Have they come to a point of saying, well, it was a good thing really? Of course it wasn't. But I see the way that they pour their lives out into vulnerable and troubled young people. I think the way they've responded is good. Or I think of Kerry, dying of cancer. And yet in every single Instagram post that she put up, the hashtag at the end, choose joy, because she was determined that the hope that she had in Jesus was something that would radiate out of her, and that others could know that hope too. Being a Christian doesn't mean that we look at our circumstances and say it's all good. No, it's not. But it does help us to respond in a way which brings goodness and help to others. And lastly, let me just say this. As we look at the mess and the brokenness of our world, it should also remind us of the heart of the Christian faith itself. Have you ever thought it strange that the symbol of Christianity is a cross? I mean, the symbol of brutal execution. I remember chatting with a Muslim friend a few years ago and talking about the Christian claim that God in Jesus suffered on a cross for us. And my friend said to me, he says, that is why I could not believe in the God of Christianity. I could not believe in a God who would take human form and suffer weakness on a cross. And I thought about what he said. And I thought, but actually that's the reason why I can believe in the God of Christianity. Because this isn't a God who stayed distant from the mess, but this is a God who stepped into the mess and experienced the messiness of life in this world. Think about it. He was born into a country that was occupied by a foreign power. His parents had to flee a genocide to save his life. He spent a couple of years as a refugee. He was misunderstood. He was rejected. He was betrayed. He was tortured. He faced injustice. He faced the most painful form of execution ever invented. And the claim of the Bible is that that was God stepping into the mess. After the First World War, there was a poet called Edward Shillito. And he, like many others, were trying to come to terms with the awful experiences that they had been through. And to do so, he wrote a short poem. And it's a poem called Jesus of the Scars. And it goes like this. The other gods were strong, but thou was weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to thy throne. But to our wounds, only God's wounds can speak. And not a God has wounds, but thou alone. What kind of God can you believe in the mess of this world? The God who stepped into the mess. He suffered with us. But just before I finish, you might be saying, well, how does that help me? If he just, suffered with us. Imagine tomorrow I'm walking down the middle of Cambridge. I bump into you and I say to you, how are you feeling? and you say, well, Michael, not feeling good. I've got a really bad headache. Not COVID, but I've got a really bad headache. And I say to you, I'm really, really sorry. I feel fine. But I say, wait a second. So I walk over to the nearest brick wall and I headbutt it really hard. And then I walk back holding my head and I say, but now I've got a headache too. I can sympathize with you. Now, what are you thinking at that moment in time? Are you thinking, oh, thanks? No, you're not. You're thinking, what an idiot. You haven't helped me, you haven't helped yourself. Now we both need to go to Mainsbury's and get some paracetamol. See? Used it. See, I'm not impressed, am I, if all you're doing is identifying with me in my pain. And that's why it's really important that the Christian claim is not simply that God stepped into the mess to suffer with us, but also the Bible says he stepped into the mess to suffer for us. See, the Bible says the mess out there and the mess in here has consequences. It would separate us from God now and forever. And when Jesus came ultimately to die on a cross, he was taking upon himself the mess of our world and the mess of our lives so that it could be dealt with, so that we could be forgiven, so that we could be reconnected to this God who wants to be with us through life, through the good times and the bad, through death, whenever it may come, and into an eternity where everything is restored. And my question is tonight, what do you make of that? Maybe you're here tonight and say, well, I'm not convinced at all, but thanks for the hot chocolate. And if that's what you're thinking, thanks so much for coming. Thanks so much for sticking around and listening. Great to have you with us. But if you are going to reject this, or at least kind of write it off, can I just throw out two challenges? Firstly, before you reject it, please make sure you know what you're rejecting. Have you ever taken time to read through one of the accounts of the life of Jesus for yourself as an adult and made up your own mind about what you think about it all? And if not, why not take one of the ones that's on your tables? We'd love you to take it away as a free gift. And just do that. Take a couple of hours to read through, but make sure you know what it is you're rejecting. But also, if you're going to reject the Christian answer to the brokenness and mess of our world, how are you going to make sense of this world? Not just in theory, in a philosophy class, but in the reality of the mess of life as it hits us in different ways. It's an important question, and one that's worth asking, not in the midst of it, but actually before we sometimes have to face it. Maybe you're here and you're saying, well, kind of intrigued, but I've got questions. Well, great, we're going to have questions in a minute. But do keep coming through this week. Do keep exploring. Do meet up with guys in your college and discuss these things further. We'd love to help you do that. If this stuff is, even if there's a chance it was true, wouldn't it be worth looking into more? But maybe you're saying, actually, I think this could be true. And if it is, what do I do about it? Well, why don't you ask this God, the God who came to deal with the mess, not just the mess out there, but the mess in here, to come and deal with yours? We moved into a house recently, and one of the things we discovered moving to this house is that the bin collection in our house only happens every 2 weeks, okay? And so there's a great stress, in our house every 2 weeks to not forget the bins. Because, it's really stressful. It's like if you miss it, there's like a whole month of rotting stuff sitting in that bin, getting extra smelly. And so we kind of put reminders on our phone and on the wall, and it's like, remember the bins, need to get rid of the rubbish. But what about the mess in our lives? The great news of the Christian faith is actually God wants us to be able to get rid of that so that we can be connected to him. And if we ask him to do that for us, he will. And we can get started on that relationship with him. Look, I've spoken for long enough. We're going to have a short break, and you can chat around your tables. You can say what you thought of that. You can be completely honest. I'm not going to be listening in. But there's two other things you can do as well. One is, if you've not already, go to Pigeonhole and stick in the code MESS and ask your questions or vote on other people's questions. And the third thing you can do is on your tables, there are some little feedback forms. And we'd love to hear what you think about these events. And we'd love to get your ideas on what we could do better as well. So just leave some comments. There's not much space, but you can use the back as well if you like. But also, if you'd like to find out more, if you're intrigued to look into this further, maybe you'd like to meet up with someone to chat about these things, then also tick the appropriate boxes there and then leave your name and your stats. Is that what you do? Or your details? I'm making up the slang now. I probably shouldn't do that. But yeah, leave your details on there. and someone will get in touch with you. But let's have 5 minutes to chat, and then we'll be back for about 10 minutes of questions before we wrap up later on. Thanks.
We'll just get through as many of the most popular as we can. Might not necessarily do them in the order it is, but we'll do as many as we can. So first question, Michael. Why does life need to have a meaning? Is it not enough to simply live for happiness, joy, and love for yourself and others?
Yeah, interesting question. I guess part of me would want to say, surely that is the meaning that you're trying to at least create for life. Even if you say, well, it's to live for happiness or joy or whatever. You know, in a sense, that is creating some sort of meaning. And my question, therefore, is that based on anything kind of objective, or is that it? Is there a bigger story that we tap into? Or is it just something that we've created for ourselves? And I think, you know, it's very easy to go through life without asking big philosophical questions and live a very satisfied life. But here's the thing. If we stop to think about these things, and it's good to stop to think about them, do we have to basically conclude, like, well, I'll carry on living life this way in spite of the fact that actually it doesn't really make sense with my philosophy of the world? Or I can carry on living this way because it makes sense from the way I view the world. And one of the beautiful things I'd say about the Christian worldview is that it helps us to look at things like love and joy and happiness and say, these things are not accidents. These things really, truly are important, wonderful parts of life because of the way the world is. And that's what we're going to look at over the course of this week. We looked at happiness at lunchtime. These things are made best sense of when we see it in the storyline of the Bible. We're not having to kind of like say, well, I'll just not think about it too deeply and carry on with stuff. No, we can think about it really deeply and say, yeah, actually, there is a reason for why these things seem important to us.
Thank you. Next one. Feeling as though my life has meaning makes me want to keep myself alive longer. Who's to say it's not just evolution that makes us feel like life has meaning?
Yeah, interesting question. So could that kind of desire for meaning be a part of our human survival instincts and therefore, in a sense, you know, a byproduct, you might say, of the evolutionary process? And I guess to an extent you might say that that could be explained, couldn't it? Although there'd be some interesting questions maybe I'd want to ask about that. Just read a fascinating book just a week ago, actually, by a guy called Atul Gawande, called Being Mortal. And one of the things actually he says is that the problem, particularly we've often faced in medicine, is that we feel that the purpose of life is just staying alive for as long as possible. And actually one of the questions that people have had to face up to in things like palliative care is actually maybe length of life alone is not the most important thing. Maybe we need to ask the question, what is life about? What is the purpose of life, not just living as long as possible? That's an interesting question, maybe that we would have to ask. And then also, sometimes we would admire people who do things that actually, in a sense, go right against their own ability to survive. Think about the self-sacrifice that we admire in others, or the self-sacrifice of those who gave their lives for us. In a sense, like, that didn't keep them alive longer. But we might say, but we admire that. So where does that come from? So to an extent, we might say, well, that explains some things, but I don't think it helps us understand the full gamut of what we talk about as meaning and significance.
Next one. Surely you don't have to be a Christian to turn a bad situation into helping others.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, because actually one of the things I was really conscious of when I was talking about that is you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, Rachel Dell Hollander isn't the only example of someone who has responded to a horrifically evil situation in a way that has brought about good and hope to others. And certainly there are examples of people who wouldn't embrace the Christian faith and yet have done wonderful things in response to the evil they've experienced to actually bring good to our world. So I'm not saying that it is impossible to do that unless you embrace the Christian faith. And one of the things the Bible says is that we are created in the image of God, and we can reflect something of that, whether or not we believe that, whether or not we embrace the Christian faith, and we see that in different ways. But what I would say is I think knowing the reality of God's love really does help us to respond to that in a way that maybe we wouldn't otherwise. And I can certainly say that in my own experience as well. Knowing that actually there is a God of justice and a God of love, and knowing that that God is with me by his Spirit, strengthening me and helping me. Part of that means that I don't have to take revenge because I can trust that actually God is just and that ultimately justice will be done. And also, it helps me because I know that this God has poured out his love on people who are undeserving, me included, and therefore it helps me to respond with love where actually maybe naturally I wouldn't be inclined to. So I think the Christian faith does give us some real resources to respond in those ways. Yeah.
Thanks. Do you think life needs meaning for someone to be happy, or are they two independent ideas?
Does life need meaning for people to be happy? We kind of touched on this a little bit at lunchtime. If you missed Niv's talk, then I think it's on YouTube? Yeah, so catch Niv's talk. It was great. I was struck by something I read a while back in Yuval Noah Harari's book, Homo Sapiens, Sapiens, talking about the history of Homo Sapiens. And he says all the things that we think bring us happiness, like success and marriage and all these things. He says, actually, if you want happiness, just take drugs. Now, he's being a bit facetious, but he's saying basically, we know what causes happiness. It's chemical reactions in the brain. And actually, there are much, much easier ways of producing those chemical reactions than some of the elaborate ways that we go about trying to produce those chemical reactions. I mean, like marriage is a very involved way of producing that. Just take drugs. Now, most of us would say, well, okay, no, because why? Because actually, we feel that, well, there's something more, isn't there, than just chemical reactions in the brain. And maybe, as Niv was sharing at lunchtime, there's something more than just experiences of happiness. And in one sense, I'd say the Christian faith says happiness is a wonderful thing. God created us to be able to know and experience joy and pleasure. And one of the problems is actually sometimes we settle for too little, not too much, according to C.S. Lewis, writing about it a few years ago. We're too easily pleased. But on the flip side, I'd also want to say that if all we do is live for happiness alone, that is too small a thing. And actually, real happiness is often a byproduct of living for something bigger than happiness itself. And I think Christianity gives us a clue as to how we can discover that.
Next one. How does God help us through the mess, and how can we recognize when he's doing so?
Yeah, that's a great question. How does God help us? How can we recognize? Because actually, sometimes it can feel like we can't see him, we can't touch him, we don't hear him audibly. So how does God help me in the midst of life? But that's a great question, because if you're here and you're saying, well, look, I'm not yet a Christian, but I want to know what difference it would make. Actually, is this worth following Jesus? What resources will I have if I start following Jesus that I don't currently have to face this messy world? And I think there's a few things. Number one, I think it gives you a big picture into which you can put your specific situation that you're going through. I find it tremendously helpful to be able to say, I haven't got all the answers to all the specific questions, why this or why that, but yet the feelings I have make sense because we are in a broken world. And that longing that I have for a better world makes sense because actually one day God is going to restore this world. So I can put my experience into a bigger picture. Also, what I'd say is that in the heart of Christianity, we have a God who suffered. And so when I look to Jesus, I have a God who can stand with me in my suffering, who knows what it's like. There's a lovely verse in the New Testament. It talks about how Jesus is like our high priest, our leader, who's able to sympathize with us in our experiences of suffering because he himself has been through it. That's wonderful. It gives me hope. So I know that this isn't the end of the story. And it doesn't mean that, I don't go through suffering. I will. But I know that there's hope to come. And that can make a difference, can't it? If you know tomorrow you've got the dentist, you probably don't feel too good tonight. If you know tomorrow you're going on holiday, you feel a lot better because your knowledge of what happens in the future changes your experience in the present. And in a kind of bigger scale, the Christian faith says we've got wonderful certain hope of what the future holds. It gives us joy in the midst of what's going on. Also, I'd say this, being a Christian gives us the community of other Christians who can share in that. And for me, one of the things I've found so precious has been the help and support I've found in the community of the church as I've sometimes gone through really tough times, the support and help. And actually that is a wonderful thing that God has designed to to help support us. And so those are just a few things. There's more we could say, but some wonderful resources that say actually God really can help us in the midst of it.
I think we've got time for two more.
Okay.
In Christianity, is meaning sought through marriage and family as is in Islam?
Yeah, good question. Marriage and family are certainly very important, and we can see that's part of God's pattern of how humanity was set up, and how that's really good for humanity. But I found really helpful, in the beginning of the Bible, God creates humanity, and you've got the original human being, and then God says something really profound. He says it's not good for man to be alone. And so he creates someone else. And it's very interesting. God doesn't say it's not good for man to be single, or not good for man to be unmarried, not good for man to be alone. And that's helpful because sometimes we can feel that actually marriage is the ultimate thing that we need in life. Marriage is a wonderful thing. It took me 39 years to clock on to that fact, but just before the pandemic, I worked out that it was a good thing, and just in time, got to enjoy it through lockdown. Marriage is a wonderful thing, but actually, the Bible says it's not just marriage we need. We need relationships bigger than that. We're made for each other, and that's why the Christian church, at its best, is a beautiful thing to be part of, because we're brought into community, not just with the spouse and a biological family, but a much, much bigger family that spans the globe. And the Bible says we're brought into a relationship with a God who loves us and knows us. So marriage, family, they're beautiful things. But the good news of Christianity says, you miss out on that, don't worry. They're good things, but they're actually, at best, a pointer towards a bigger family and an even better relationship that's available to all of us.
Last question, top voted one.
Okay.
How can we be certain that there is a good eternity or afterlife? Is it just a way of consoling yourself in pain to hope there's a better life?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. Because you might be sitting here tonight saying, well, isn't this just a bit of hoping for the best, a kind of psychological crutch, a kind of Freudian way of kind of projecting our human longings into the heavens and deciding that this must be true just because we want it to be true. And of course, if Christianity isn't true, if God doesn't exist, that could be a very good explanation of why people continue to believe in God, because they want it to be true. But equally, the problem is with that argument is it can be turned around, can't it? If God does exist, you could also argue that the reason why some people don't believe in God is that they actually don't want the idea of an ultimate day of judgments where everything is accounted for. We don't like that, so we like to believe something else. You see, you can argue it both ways. So that kind of idea that we project our longings into the heavens and believe stuff that we want to be true doesn't actually help us establish what is true. It just seeks to explain why people may or may not believe things, whether or not they might be true. How do we know therefore it's true? That's the big question. Well, my short answer is come on Friday. My slightly longer answer is because on Friday, we're going to be looking at the heart of that Christian hope. And the heart of the Christian hope, the basis of that Christian hope, is the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. We thought about the crucifixion of Jesus tonight, but that's not the end of the story. If it had been, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight talking about it. This would have been long forgotten. But the heart of the Christian story is that actually this hope is based on Jesus' resurrection. Now, I'm aware that for some of you, that is like, well, no, I wanted evidence, not just a religious story. But actually the surprising thing is, as you start to investigate it, this is the one story that might start to challenge your naturalism. The one story when you start to look at the evidence for it that maybe causes us to question everything. I was in Warwick last week, chatting to a lovely guy all week, and he was very skeptical about the Christian faith. But we had loads of great chats about stuff, and he was really engaged. And on the last day, we talked about the resurrection, and he thought about the evidence, and he said to me afterwards, he says, I think this could be true. He says, this will turn my world upside down if it is, though. That's true, it will. But the wonderful thing is, it therefore invites us to investigate it. It's not just saying, oh, just believe it because it's nice. This isn't too good to be true, as someone said. It's good because it's true. So come on Friday. If you can't wait till Friday, some great books on the bookstall at the back there that look at some of those kind of questions that we might have, and they're all free. So do get those books, start reading them before Friday, and checking it out for yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed it. There are, like Michael mentioned, some orange feedback forms which we'd love for you to fill in. We'd love to get in contact with you if you do have any questions, so please do fill it in.
Yeah, and also like Michael said, there's a bookstall at the back with loads of books. They're all free. We would love it if you wanted to take one and have a read. One particular one I want to plug is a book by Michael called Making Sense of Life. If anything tonight interested you and you'd like to find out more, have a read of one of those. And also, if you're joining on the live stream, don't worry, don't need to feel left out. There's a link to the bookstore and the feedback forms in the description on the YouTube video for this event.
We've got lots more events happening this week where we'll be exploring themes such as community, hope, perfect, and justice. And tomorrow especially we'll be looking at community. So there's going to be a talk in this building from 1 to 2 p.m. with free lunch, obviously. And an evening event, we'll be exploring the question of how can I find belonging in an individualistic world. That's at 7:30 in St. Andrew's the Great Church, which is not here, but just across Christ's College is like that way, I think. So yeah, we'd love to see you there.
Yeah, and for now, do feel free to stick around and keep chatting. I think there's more food, hot chocolate. Keep thinking about what you've heard this evening. Michael will also be around, so if you have any questions or your question didn't get answered, do go and chat to him. I'm sure he'd love to answer some more. If you're on the live stream, there's also a Zoom that's going to be happening. The link to that is in the description on the YouTube video. And yeah, do go to that if you have any questions, want to keep chatting, or just need some more social interaction in isolation.
Again, thank you so much for coming, and have a good night.